He said I talked too loud. My coffee went cold before my pride did. That was the day I stopped explaining my volume and started building a microphone empire. My name's Helen, 45 years old, born with a voice that could cut through thunder and still sound like Sunday morning. This is the story of how one insult became an entire podcast network. The office smelled like burnt espresso and bad decisions that Monday. You could feel the tension hum between the cubicles, the kind that tells you layoffs are coming, but nobody wants to say it first. I'd just finished leading our client pitch, 15 minutes of smooth flow, crisp stats, and charm. Everyone clapped except Marcus, my manager. He leaned back in that squeaky chair, lips twisting like he'd bitten into something sour. "Good work, Helen," he said, dragging out the words. "Maybe next time keep your tone a little softer, less loud." I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he wasn't. "Loud?" I asked, setting my notebook down. He nodded. "Yeah, you dominate the room. Some people find it intimidating." "Intimidating," I repeated, like tasting a word that didn't belong to me. "You mean confident?" He smiled thinly. "Let's call it projecting too much energy." That's how they do it. Turn your fire into a fault. On my lunch break, I sat in my car, windows up, rain drumming on the roof like applause from God. I pulled out my phone and whispered to myself, "They don't like my voice? Then I'll make them pay to hear it." The idea hit like lightning, half anger, half calling. A podcast. Not some hobby girl side project, a full-scale production with stories from women like me who'd been told they were too loud, too emotional, too much. I opened my notes app and typed the name, Louder. Underneath, I wrote, "Every woman they tried to quiet will have a mic here." That night, my kitchen turned into a studio. I laid a towel over the table to dampen sound, set my old laptop on a stack of cookbooks, used a $20 USB mic that still smelled like the box it came in. "Welcome to Louder," I said, voice trembling but fierce, "where silence ends and stories begin." The first episode was raw. You could hear my neighbor's dog barking halfway through and my fridge humming like backup singers. But when I uploaded it, something wild happened. Within a week, I had 12,000 plays. By week 3, 50,000. And the first comment? "Girl, your voice made me quit my job." At work, Marcus started noticing. He'd walk past my desk, see my phone blowing up with notifications, and pretend not to care. But one morning, he stopped. "What's this Louder thing I keep hearing about?" "It's a little project," I said, sipping coffee slow. "Something for women who've been told to shrink." He frowned. "Just make sure it doesn't interfere with your real job." Real job. Funny how the same man who wrote my performance reviews now downloads my episodes secretly at night. I know because the analytics show his city, his device, his timestamp. By month 4, advertisers started calling. A Black-owned skincare line wanted a mid-roll spot. Then a university reached out about licensing my content for their women's studies program. I'd never felt that kind of validation before, the kind that comes in zeros at the end of an invoice. Still, every victory came with noise. My ex-husband, Daryl, called one night. "So now you some kinda celebrity?" "No," I said, "just loud enough to be heard." He laughed. "You always did like the sound of your own voice." I smiled into the phone. "And now, so does the world." He hung up before I could say goodbye. The real test came 6 months in. Marcus called me into his office again. Same chair, same lemon-fresh air that never smelled like fairness. "We're restructuring," he said. "Your role's being merged." "Merged," I repeated. "That mean I'm fired?" He sighed. "Let's call it transitioning out. You'll get a severance." I didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't even blink. Because while he was reading that corporate script, I was watching my phone. New notification. Louder surpasses 1 million downloads. So I just said, "That's fine, Marcus. I was getting too loud for this room anyway." I spent the next 3 months building what I wish I'd had. Equipment, mentorship, and faith. My cousin Tasha, a sound engineer, helped me mix audio right. My friend Leah, a social media strategist, helped turn clips into gold. We turned my spare bedroom into a full recording suite. Foam panels, condenser mics, and a neon sign that said, "Louder Still." Every wall became a shrine to women's voices, mothers, poets, teachers, janitors, and CEOs who refused to shrink. The soundboard lit up like a heartbeat every time someone spoke truth into it. And I thought, this is church now. This is the altar for every woman they silenced. The first live show sold out in 15 minutes. 300 seats at a community theater downtown. I wore a red blazer and gold earrings shaped like microphones. When the spotlight hit, I could see a sea of women holding up phones, crying, cheering, testifying. I opened with the same line that started it all. He said I talked too loud. They roared like a choir. That's when I knew this wasn't revenge anymore. It was resurrection. Months later, I got a call from a media investor in New York. He said, "We love your storytelling. Ever thought about starting a network?" I laughed. "Baby, I am the network." He chuckled. "Let's make that official." He wired the seed funding the same week. We launched the Louder Network, 6 shows hosted by Black women from across the country. One about finances, one about motherhood, one about faith and feminism. Every episode opened with a clip of my original voice saying, "Speak up. Somebody needs the sound of you." The irony? 2 years later, that same company I used to work for reached out. They wanted to partner on a branded podcast series for diversity and inclusion. Guess who they called to host? I took the meeting out of curiosity, walked into that same glass office, same squeaky chair, same lemon air. Marcus was still there, same haircut, more gray. He looked up, saw me, and froze. "Wow, Helen, you look successful." I smiled. "I sound successful too." He tried to joke. "You always had the voice for radio." I leaned forward, elbows on the table. "And now I have the platform you'll be advertising on. Rate card starts at $30,000 a spot." Silence, the kind that feels like justice paid in full. Later that night, I sat on my porch, mug of mint tea steaming in my hands. Rain tapped the roof again, softer this time, like applause from heaven instead of warning. My neighbor's kid shouted through the fence, "Miss Helen, my mama listens to your show." I smiled. "Tell her I said speak up, baby." People always ask how I did it, how I turned humiliation into headlines. But truth is, I didn't chase revenge. I just stopped whispering. And when I stopped whispering, the world turned up the volume. Now every time a young girl messages me saying, "They said I'm too loud," I reply, "Good, stay that way, the mic is waiting." Because being loud never broke me. It built me. The morning after the network launched, I woke up to 3 missed calls, 2 voicemails, and 1 headline I'll never forget. Local woman turns voice into $1 million podcast empire. I blinked at the screen, half laughing, half crying. I wasn't ready for that kind of attention. Not from the world, and definitely not from my past. Because attention comes with echoes. And sometimes the people who used to ignore you suddenly remember your number. By noon, my mother called. "Helen, baby, you on the news." Her voice carried that Sunday morning mix of pride and disbelief. "They showing your face on Channel 7 right now. You wearing that red blazer I bought you?" I smiled, rubbing my eyes. "Yes, Mama." "Well, you look blessed. Just remember, loud don't mean you wrong." She paused. "It just means they finally listenin'." That right there felt like scripture. But success don't come with silence. By evening, my inbox was flooding. Sponsorships, collabs, shady management deals offering to take just 40%. And then there were the messages from old coworkers. "Proud of you, sis. You always had that spark." Even Marcus's assistant sent a LinkedIn message. "Mr. Jensen says congrats. He always knew you'd go far." I laughed so hard I almost spilled my tea. He always knew. That man wouldn't give me the company mic for a conference call. But not all messages were sweet. Buried between the applause were a few bitter ones. From Daryl, my ex-husband, So you think you somebody now? Don't forget who paid your rent when you was still dreaming. I stared at the message, thumb hovering. I could have responded with a paragraph. Instead, I sent one line. Appreciate the down payment. I bought the building. He didn't reply. A week later, I got an invite to speak at a Women in Business Summit in Atlanta. Keynote speaker, all expenses paid. The flyer said Helen Harper, founder of the Louder Network. I'd never seen my name that big before. I printed it out and stuck it on my fridge, right next to my light bill from 2015, the one I barely paid. A reminder that struggle has receipts, too. When I walked into that Atlanta ballroom, the air felt thick with perfume and ambition. You could tell every woman there carried a story that once hurt to tell, and that's what I loved. Rooms like that hum different. They vibrate with women holding in power they haven't used yet. The host, a young influencer with curls like radio waves, handed me the mic. "Ladies," she said, "please welcome the voice that refuses to be turned down, Helen Harper." The applause hit like a heartbeat. I stepped forward, heels echoing on marble, red blazer glowing under the lights. "Thank you," I said, then paused. Let the silence stretch, long enough for the room to breathe. Because sometimes, silence is the first note of a sermon. "My name's Helen," I began, "and 2 years ago somebody told me I talk too loud, so I built a business out of being heard." The crowd leaned in like the story was theirs. And maybe it was. Every sentence after that felt like testifying. When I finished, I didn't need applause. The tears shining in those women's eyes were the standing ovation I came for. After the panel, a woman about my age stopped me near the lobby. She had on a navy suit and tired eyes that looked too familiar. "Ms. Helen," she said softly, "I work in HR. Every meeting, they call me aggressive when I speak up." Her lip trembled. "What do I do?" I touched her arm. "You stop asking permission," I said. "Let them call you what they want, as long as you don't call yourself small." She nodded, and for a moment we just stood there, two strangers in the gospel of survival. That's the thing about stories. They heal on contact. Back home in D.C., business grew faster than I could breathe. 3 new shows joined the network. Tasha handled sound design full-time. Leah managed a social team of 5. We had a studio downtown now, glass walls, neon sign, espresso machine that actually worked. Every morning we'd huddle like a family. Tasha would clap her hands. "All right, saints, what's the sound of freedom today?" And we'd all laugh, because we knew that wasn't just a slogan. That was our life. But growth comes with ghosts. One day I got an email from Marcus. Subject line, "Opportunity to reconnect." I almost deleted it. But curiosity's a dangerous flavor of peace. So I opened it. He wrote, "Helen, hope you're well. Our company is interested in developing a leadership series for women in corporate spaces. We'd love for the Louder Network to produce it. Let's discuss." I stared at that email so long I could smell the lemon air again. And then I laughed. The same man who said my voice was too much for management now wanted to license it for management training. I scheduled the call because closure deserves witnesses. Zoom meeting, 11 a.m. sharp. Marcus appeared on screen, slightly pixelated but still smug. "Hey, Helen," he said. "Wow, you've really built something special here." "Sure did," I said, smiling like a knife in silk. He cleared his throat. "We'd love to collaborate. Maybe a motivational podcast under our brand?" "Under your brand," I repeated. "Baby, this is the brand." He blinked. "We can offer equity," I interrupted. "You couldn't afford my silence back then. You definitely can't afford my voice now." He tried to laugh, but it came out thin. I ended the call with, "Next time, Marcus, try listening at full volume." Then I hung up, turned on my mic, and recorded a new intro for Louder. Some folks only believe in your voice once they can't control it. That episode hit 2 million plays in 48 hours. A month later, I got invited to the Black Women in Media Awards in New York, nominated for Voice of the Year. When they called my name, the room rose to its feet like it was church. I walked up, gold dress glimmering, pulse steady. Holding that award felt like holding every no I'd ever swallowed. I looked at the crowd and said, to every woman who was told she's too loud, "Baby, that's just the sound of your power warming up." The applause sounded like thunder, baptized in grace. Later, backstage, I met a producer from Spotify. Tall woman, sharp suit, softer smile. "Your story's changing the industry," she said. "You ever think about launching a show that mentors new voices?" I smiled. "Already building it. Gonna call it The Choir Room." She grinned. "Of course you are." That night in my hotel room, I took off my lashes, poured a glass of cheap champagne, and called my mama. She answered on speaker, TV playing softly in the background. "Mama, guess what?" "You won, didn't you?" I laughed. "How you know?" "I been knowin'. You were born with a broadcast in your breath." I blinked back tears. Sometimes love sounds like prophecy. A few weeks later, I was walking into the studio when Tasha waved her phone. "Auntie, look at this." She showed me a TikTok. A teenage girl in her bedroom holding a hairbrush like a mic, lip-syncing to my words from episode 1. Caption read, "They said I talked too loud, so I'm starting my own podcast." I just stood there, hand over my chest, tears burning hot. That's when it hit me. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about relay, passing the mic so the next generation never had to ask for one. Still, there are quiet nights when the past creeps in like static, when I remember the way Marcus looked over his glasses or the way Daryl slammed doors. But then I hear a ping. Another episode going live somewhere, another woman's story breaking free. And the noise turns into peace again. People always say success changes you. Maybe it does. But I think it just turns up what was already there. I've always been loud. Now I'm just amplified. I thought building a network would bring peace. But peace don't come easy when your dream starts paying rent in the same neighborhood as your old pain. Because success is loud. And the louder it gets, the more silence you notice around you. The first crack showed up in something small. An email from a sponsor asking if I could tone down the black church cadence. They said it kindly, like they were giving advice, but the way my chest tightened told me it was something else. I read it twice, slow. Then I sent one sentence back. "My voice is not a flavor you can water down." I didn't lose the sponsor, but I did lose my patience for politeness. Later that week, my producer Leah came in looking worried. "Boss," she said, holding her phone like a confession, "you seen this?" She turned the screen toward me, a podcast clip from some white influencer titled, "When Loud Becomes Unprofessional." The thumbnail had my picture blurred in the background. I pressed play. Her voice floated out, all sweet venom. Some people mistake aggression for authenticity. Just because you're loud doesn't mean you're right. Leah muttered, "They subtweeted a whole sermon." I smiled slow. "Then let's give them a whole gospel." That night, I recorded an episode called The Volume of Grace. "Sometimes," I said into the mic, voice steady as steel, "they call it loud because it sounds like truth. They call it angry because it sounds like accountability. But baby, if the truth don't rattle the walls a little, maybe the room was built wrong." The episode went viral overnight. 2 million plays, 500,000 comments, and guess who followed me the next morning? That same influencer. Funny how grace works louder than clapbacks. A few months later, the Louder Network hit its 2nd anniversary. We celebrated in the studio. Red velvet cupcakes, champagne, gospel playlist, humming through the speakers. Tasha brought out a big whiteboard with all our milestones written in gold. 6 shows, 18 hosts, 72 countries, 15 million monthly downloads. I stood there staring at it, humbled and hungry all at once, because every number was a heartbeat that used to be ignored. Then Tasha grinned. "Next year we go global, Auntie. London, Lagos, Toronto." I laughed. Baby, at this point, we gonna need passports for the microphones. But not everybody was clapping. 2 days later, I got a letter from Marcus's company's legal department. Cease and desist, it read, accusing the Louder Network of infringing on a slogan they suddenly trademarked, "Hear Her Power." That phrase had been mine, used on every banner, every episode since year one. They just filed it last week. I sat at my desk, letter trembling in my hand. Then I laughed, a deep gospel laugh that shook the whole office. Tasha peeked in. "What's funny?" They really tried to trademark my own thunder. That night, I called my lawyer, a brilliant black woman named Kendra, who wore hoop earrings big enough to catch light. She listened, calm, then said, "We not negotiating, we suing." 3 weeks later, the court summons went out. The story hit every outlet. Media giant faces lawsuit from black-owned podcast network over stolen slogan. Suddenly, everyone wanted interviews, but I only gave one. I sat across from the host of Good Morning America, coffee mug in hand, and said, "They told me I talked too loud. Now they trying to copyright my echo." The internet exploded. Daryl called again that night. "Damn, Helen, you everywhere. You really suing them folks?" "Yep," he whistled. "Ain't you scared?" "Scared?" I said, sipping tea. "Baby, I've been scared before, but not like this. This time fear's sitting in my audience taking notes." He laughed low. "You different now." I smiled. "No, I'm just finally unmuffled." Court dragged for months. Depositions, filings, strategy calls at midnight. Every time I walked into that courthouse, reporters shouted my name like it was a victory chant. But I stayed calm, because real power don't need to perform. The day of the final hearing, Marcus showed up. He didn't have to. But ego always wants front row seats. When our eyes met, he smirked like old times. "Didn't expect to see you here, Helen." I tilted my head. I could say the same. "Last time I was in your office, you told me to lower my voice." He chuckled. "Guess I didn't realize how profitable it could be." I leaned closer. "That's all right. I turned your ignorance into interest." 2 weeks later, the verdict came in. We won. Full ownership of the slogan reinstated. Damages awarded. Public apology required. When I read the headline, "Harper wins landmark case for creative ownership," I just sat in silence. Not shock, just peace. Because the sound of justice is quieter than you think. The next Sunday, my church invited me to speak. Now, I hadn't been behind that pulpit in years, but it felt right. The choir hummed softly as I walked up, heels tapping like rhythm on wood. "Family," I began. Y'all remember when I was just the lady in the back row with a notebook and a dream?" Laughter rippled through the pews. "Well, look at God. Turned a too loud woman into a testimony." I paused, looked out at all those faces shining back at me. Don't let nobody shame your volume. God gave you that sound for a reason. And sometimes, the only difference between gossip and gospel is how bold you say it. The congregation hollered. One old deacon shouted, "Say that, Miss Helen!" That moment right there, that was worth more than any award. Later that evening, I sat in my car outside the church, phone buzzing nonstop with messages from journalists and fans. But I ignored them all. Because my favorite message wasn't digital. It came from a folded note tucked under my windshield wiper. Written in neat cursive, "Thank you for reminding me my daughter's voice ain't a problem, it's a prophecy, Sister Johnson." I cried right there in that parking lot, tears falling slow as redemption. That week, Louder crossed 50 million total downloads. Spotify offered exclusive distribution, and the Louder Network officially became the first Black woman-owned podcast conglomerate in the U.S. I should have been celebrating, but instead, I booked a flight to North Carolina, the place where I first learned silence. See, I grew up in a small house where my daddy used to say, "Children should be seen, not heard," and my mama would hush me with that soft, tired smile mothers use when they're surviving too much to argue. I learned to swallow words before I could spell them, until one day I didn't. I stood in that same backyard, dirt path still there, oak tree older but faithful. I whispered, "You were wrong, Daddy. I was meant to be heard." The wind rustled through the leaves like applause, and for the first time in 40 years, I didn't whisper back. When I got home, I found a package on my doorstep. No label, just a gold ribbon. Inside was a vintage microphone, the exact model from the 1950s, engraved with one word, louder. No note. But I knew who sent it. Marcus, maybe guilt, maybe grace. Either way, I placed it in the studio window right where the sunlight hits every morning, because forgiveness ain't silence. It's just volume turned inward. That night, I recorded one more episode, the title, When They Call You Loud. I spoke slow, steady, soft. Don't let the world convince you your light's too bright. Don't dim it. Learn to direct it, because the same voice they mocked might one day build a platform big enough to lift somebody else. Then I ended with a smile you could hear. Now go speak up. Somebody needs the sound of you. The mic light went off, and for a second, the silence felt holy. They say peace is quiet, but baby, my peace hums like a studio full of stories waiting to be told. Every morning now starts the same way. Soft gospel, playing, coffee brewing, and that old gold microphone catching sunrise like it's baptizing the day. When I speak into it, I swear it hums back. By year 3, the Louder Network had grown beyond anything I could have dreamed. We weren't just podcasts anymore. We were voices that moved cities. Women from Detroit to Durban, Memphis to Montreal, sending in their own stories, their own confessions, their own too loud moments. We called it the Volume Project, a global anthology of women who refused to whisper. And when the first live broadcast aired, I sat backstage watching the numbers climb, 100K viewers, then 200K, then 1 million. Tasha turned to me, eyes wide. "Auntie, we trended on Twitter." I grinned. Good, let's trend for truth. But with light comes shadow. The bigger we got, the more people wanted a piece of the sound. Investors, agencies, politicians. Everybody wanted to partner, to collaborate, to align values. But I could see through the glitter. Half of them didn't care about voices. They cared about profit. They wanted to bottle the soul and sell it back watered down. So I made a decision. No one owns Louder. Not now. Not ever. We stayed independent. Self-funded, black-led, woman-run. And every time someone told me that was not sustainable, I smiled. Because the same people once told me my tone wasn't professional. Turns out I don't do professional. I do purposeful. Then one day, my assistant knocked on my door. Miss Helen, there's a man in the lobby asking for you, says he's urgent." I frowned. "Who is it?" She whispered. "He says his name's Marcus." I sighed, leaned back in my chair. "Well, tell the ghost of corporate past to wait 5 minutes." When I walked out, he was standing there, suit sharp, tie too tight, humility trying to wear confidence like a borrowed coat. He looked thinner, older. His eyes darted around the studio, walls lined with our neon signs, awards, and portraits of our hosts. "Nice setup," he said. "Thank you," I replied, folding my arms. "Didn't know you listened." He chuckled weakly. "Everybody listens now." Silence. The kind that tests what kind of person you've become. He finally said, "Helen, I'm retiring." And I wanted to say, "Don't," I interrupted softly. "If it's an apology, save it. I already turned it into an empire." He nodded, swallowed hard. "I just wanted to know how you did it." I looked him dead in the eye. "I believed me. That's it." He nodded again, slowly, like maybe for the first time he actually heard me. Then he said something I didn't expect. "My daughter listens to your show, says you sound like the aunt she never had." That cracked something in me, because legacy ain't about revenge. It's about ripple. He left without another word, but when the door closed, I whispered to the air, "Thank you." and meant it. That night, I sat with Tasha editing episode 100, the milestone we'd been dreaming of since the kitchen towel days. We called it Echoes Don't Die. In it, I talked about my first heartbreak, my first too loud, and my first time realizing the world only changes when women refuse to shut up. Tasha leaned over and said, "You think we'll ever run out of stories?" I smiled. Not while the world keeps underestimating us. The next morning, I woke up to something that made me freeze mid-coffee sip, a message from a name I hadn't seen in years. "Mama, can we talk?" My son, Devin. We hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since the day he'd chosen silence over me. It wasn't hate, just distance. He'd grown into his own life, his own pride. But that message, short as it was, hit like thunder. I typed back, "Always." We met at a small diner downtown. He walked in, tall, tired, a little uncertain. I saw traces of the boy who used to sit on my lap and pretend my hairbrush was a mic. "Hey, Ma." "Hey, baby." We hugged. Awkward at first, then real. He sat down, ordered coffee black. "I've been listening to your show," he said. "Didn't realize how much I missed your voice." I smiled. "Took you long enough." He chuckled. "You always had something to say. And you always had somewhere to be." Silence again. Not heavy, just full. Then he said, "You know why I pulled away? I thought you cared more about your voice than your family." I breathed slow. I get that. But this voice was never mine alone. It was survival. It's how I made sure you'd never have to beg to be heard. His eyes softened. I get that now. I reached across the table, touched his hand. "I didn't build this network to be famous, baby. I built it so one day you could walk into a room and not flinch when you speak." He nodded, swallowed hard. "You did that." When we left, he hugged me tight and said, "You talk loud, Ma." And for the first time in years, I laughed. Not bitter, not defensive, just proud. "Good," I said. "Means you hear me." 2 weeks later, I invited Devin onto Louder for a special episode. Conversations that heal. We sat side by side in the studio, 2 mics, 2 hearts learning a new rhythm. "So," I said, smiling at him through the glass, "you ready to talk?" He grinned. "Guess it runs in the family." Listeners loved it. One comment read, "This isn't just a mother and son talking, it's generations reconciling through sound." That one got me, because they were right. The next few months felt golden. We launched new shows, trained new hosts, and signed distribution deals across 3 continents. We even opened Louder Studios South, a mentorship hub for young creators in Atlanta. Every corner buzzed with energy. You could feel it. That heartbeat of purpose. Every wall carried a quote from a different woman. "Speak like your ancestors are listening." Whispering never changed a system. Silence may be golden, but truth pays better. Then came the call that would test everything. It was from the National Broadcasting Association. They wanted to syndicate Louder. Radio, TV, streaming, all of it. Global reach, massive pay. But there was a catch. Their lawyer smiled over Zoom and said, "We'll need full editorial control, just to make sure it aligns with network standards." I leaned back, staring into the camera. "Network standards?" I said. He nodded. "You know, tone, language, religious references, emotional content." Leah, sitting beside me, mouthed, "Don't do it." I smiled. Slow. "Well, sir," I said, "I appreciate the offer, but my tone built this table. My language bought this building, and my emotion made this brand." He stuttered, "Are you saying no?" "I'm saying I don't sign contracts that mute me." And that was that. When the call ended, Leah sighed in relief. "Girl, you just turned down a fortune." I laughed. "Baby, I already got one. It's called freedom." That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat in the studio, and stared at that gold mic again. It wasn't just metal. It was memory. It was every woman who'd ever been told she was too much. And spoke anyway. I whispered, "We did it, didn't we?" The air didn't answer. It didn't have to, because some victories are quiet, and some, they hum. When you spend years fighting to be heard, sometimes the quiet after victory feels foreign. I didn't know how to rest. Not really. Every morning, even after we made it, I'd still wake up before sunrise, checking downloads, chasing deadlines that didn't even exist anymore. But peace ain't about stopping the work. It's about finally learning to breathe inside the noise. It was mid-spring when it hit me. Burnout creeping in like static at the end of a perfect song. One morning, Leah found me in the studio at 3 a.m., half asleep at the editing console. "Boss," she said, shaking her head, "when's the last time you took a day off?" I laughed, voice hoarse. "A day off? That's some new social media trend?" She crossed her arms. "You built an empire out of a microphone. The least you can do is let it breathe without you for one weekend." I waved her off, but she wasn't wrong. So for the first time in 3 years, I unplugged. I booked a solo cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. No Wi-Fi, no meetings, no microphones. Just me, a notebook, and the sound of nothing. The first night I couldn't sleep. Too quiet. No hum of the fridge, no distant city sirens, no keyboard clicks. Just crickets and wind through the trees, like nature was whispering, "You can rest now." By the second morning, I sat on the porch with coffee and realized how long it had been since I'd just heard myself think, without an audience, without applause, without proof. I wrote in my notebook, maybe loudness was never the problem. Maybe silence just needed to evolve. Day 3, I drove into town. Tiny diner, 1 gas station, 2 churches, and a thrift store that smelled like nostalgia. Behind the counter was an older black woman named Miss Ada, hair wrapped high, eyes bright with knowing. "You from the city?" she asked, handing me my coffee. "Yes, ma'am, DC." She smiled. "You the lady from the internet? The one talking about voices?" I blinked. "You listen to Louder?" "Baby," she said laughing, "every Sunday I clean this diner to your episodes. You make the mop sing." We talked for an hour. She told me about raising 3 daughters, losing one, and learning to pray out loud again. "Used to whisper my prayers," she said, "till one day I realized the devil don't respect whispers." That line stuck to my bones. When I left, she hugged me tight and whispered, "Keep making 'em listen, baby." When I got back to the cabin that night, the stars looked like microphones, little lights waiting for someone brave enough to speak. I thought about all the women who'd written to me, truck drivers, nurses, teachers, grandmamas with flip phones, saying the show made them feel seen, and I realized something. It wasn't my voice that made Louder powerful, it was ours. Back in DC, I walked into the office like a woman reborn. Leah looked up. "You glowin', did you get saved or something?" "Maybe," I said, smiling, "saved by rest." We had a big meeting that morning. Potential collaboration with a nonprofit called EchoRise, focused on helping young women from low-income communities start their own podcasts. Their director, Dr. Simone Clay, walked in. Tall, locks wrapped in gold thread, the kind of presence that makes a room listen before she even speaks. "Miss Harper," she said, shaking my hand, "what you built changed lives. We want to build studios in community centers across America and call them Louder Rooms." That name hit different. I said yes before she even finished the sentence. Within 6 months, Louder Rooms opened in 7 cities: Detroit, Atlanta, Oakland, Chicago, DC, Houston, and New Orleans. We trained teenage girls, single mothers, even retirees, teaching them how to record, edit, and share their truth. One girl in Detroit, Amara, age 15, recorded an episode called "Letters to My Absent Father." Raw, trembling, powerful. It went viral overnight. When she came to thank me later, she said, "Miss Helen, I used to think my story didn't matter." I smiled. Now 1 million people know it does. That night I cried, the good kind. Because purpose don't need applause, just proof it's still doing what God built it to do. But not everyone celebrated the expansion. Corporate media started circling again, accusing us of being too political. One news host on cable said, "The Louder Network promotes division by prioritizing identity over unity." I turned off the TV and whispered, "Funny how truth always sounds like division to those who built their peace on silence." The next morning, I dropped an unplanned episode called "Unity Ain't Uniform." It broke streaming records in 3 hours. Sometimes the best clapback is clarity. Devin called that night. "Ma, you trending again." I laughed. "Lord, I can't even rest in peace while alive." He chuckled. "You ever thought about doing a documentary? Like, visual?" I don't know, baby. I built this world for voices, not faces. "But people want to see you now," he said. "They want to see what loud looks like." That stuck with me. 2 weeks later, Netflix reached out. They'd been following the lawsuit, the movement, the network. They wanted to do a docuseries called Louder, the Woman Who Built a Movement. I sat in silence after the pitch, heart racing. They said global release, full creative control, and a platform big enough to echo across the world. For the first time, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. Filming took 6 months. They followed me from the studio to my childhood home, even back to Miss Ada's diner. They filmed Louder Room graduations, podcast tapings, and quiet nights when I'd just sit with tea and think. At first, I was nervous, because telling your story again, after finally healing, feels like reopening a scar in high definition. But when I saw how those girls looked at the camera, how proud they were to speak, I knew it was worth it. The night of the premiere, I wore a black gown and gold earrings shaped like sound waves. Devin walked me down the red carpet. Reporters shouted questions, flashbulbs popped like lightning, and for a moment, I froze. Devin leaned in. "You good, Ma?" I smiled. "I'm just realizing I used to get nervous in boardrooms. Now the whole world's the boardroom." When the lights dimmed and the first scene played, me in that kitchen years ago, whispering into a $20 mic, I heard gasps, laughter, and tears all at once. When the credits rolled, the crowd stood up. Someone in the back shouted, "Say it loud, Annie Helen!" And the whole room echoed, "Louder!" Afterward, a young journalist asked, "What do you hope people take from your story?" I smiled. That every time they tried to silence a woman, they accidentally trained a broadcaster. The quote went viral the next morning. T-shirts, billboards, murals. Even Time magazine put it on their cover next to my picture. Caption read, "The Woman Who Taught the World to Listen." That week, I visited my mama. She was sitting on her porch, radio playing softly. When she saw me, she grinned. "You famous now." I laughed. "Mama, you the reason I'm loud." She nodded. "Good, 'cause quiet never saved nobody." We sat there, rocking slow, gospel humming through the screen door. The sunset painted her face gold, and for once I didn't feel the urge to fill the silence. It was already saying everything. When I left, she said, "Helen, one day your voice gonna outlive you." I smiled. "That's the plan, Mama." And I meant it. Fame looks shiny on paper, but baby, it hums a whole different tune when you're the one inside it. Because when the lights get bright, the shadows show up too. After the Netflix doc dropped, everything changed overnight. My inbox looked like a fireworks show. Producers, universities, even politicians wanting me to lend my voice to their causes. Everyone wanted a quote, a soundbite, a blessing. But I didn't build this movement for clout. I built it for clarity. So I learned a new word that year, no. The hardest no came wrapped in gold. A streaming giant offered 8 figures, 8, to buy the Louder network outright. Full control, full ownership. They promised bigger studios, international reach, movie spin-offs. Leah read the email aloud, eyes wide. 8 zeros, Auntie, that's generational wealth. I nodded, slow. But whose generation? I stared at that contract till midnight. Then I closed the laptop, blew out a candle, and said, "Some things you don't sell, you steward." The next morning, I posted one sentence on Instagram. "My voice ain't for sale, and neither is my echo." 500,000 likes, and one DM that made me cry. from Amara, that Detroit girl we trained. She wrote, "Thank you for keeping the mic on for the rest of us." But not everybody loved my stance. Some board members started grumbling. Expansion needs capital. Authenticity doesn't pay the bills. One even said, "If you don't evolve, Helen, you'll get left behind." I looked him straight in the eye. "Baby, I am the evolution. You're just late to it." A week later, I bought out their shares. The network was mine again, all of it. Then came something I didn't expect: isolation. See? Success has a way of building walls when you're not careful. Suddenly, everyone called me Miss Harper instead of Helen. Meetings started feeling like interviews. Friends turned into fans. One night, I sat alone in that big studio. Lights off, city humming outside. I pressed record just to hear another human sound, even if it was my own. "Funny thing about microphones," I whispered. "They amplify your truth, but they can't echo back love." I didn't post that one. I just kept it. A private reminder that even loud people need soft places. A few weeks later, a letter came in the mail. Handwritten, no return address. Inside, "Dear Helen, you don't know me. I'm in a women's shelter in Ohio. We listen to your podcast every night. It's the only time the room goes quiet. Not because we're scared, but because we're healing. Thank you for being our sound of hope." I held that letter to my chest till my heart matched its rhythm. That night, I prayed out loud, not asking for more, just thanking for enough. Then life threw one of those sharp plot twists that remind you why you started. Mama fell ill, stroke, hospital. I dropped everything: interviews, meetings, press. Sat by her bedside, holding that wrinkled hand that once hushed me in church. Machines beeped steady like background percussion. Her eyes opened, soft but knowing. "Baby," she whispered, "you still loud." I smiled through tears. "Always, Mama." She chuckled weakly. "Good. World's too quiet without you." She stayed 2 more weeks. Then one morning, just as sunlight slid through the blinds, she went quiet for good. The funeral was packed. Neighbors, preachers, fans, strangers who said she raised them through my voice. When it was my turn to speak, I stepped up with that old gold mic from the studio, the one Marcus had sent. "I used to think this mic was my weapon," I said. "Turns out it was my inheritance." The crowd stood, and for once my loud didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like praise. After Mama passed, I couldn't record for 2 months. Every sound felt too sharp, every silence too deep. But grief has a way of remixing your purpose. One night, Devin came over with takeout and said, "Ma, people miss you." I sighed. "I miss me too." He smiled. "Then talk till you find her again." So I did. The comeback episode was called "What Silence Taught Me." I spoke about loss, legacy, and learning that even the strongest voices need to rest between verses. That episode broke every record we ever had. Because the truth? Vulnerability is the loudest sound of all. Months passed. The Louder Network grew in ways I couldn't have planned. University courses started teaching the Louder method. Public schools used our shows to teach confidence and speech therapy. Even the Smithsonian requested my first $20 microphone for their exhibit, Voices of the Modern Movement. When they placed it behind glass, label reading, Helen Harper 2023, founder, the Louder Network, I felt my knees wobble. Not from pride, from gratitude. That cheap plastic mic had outlived every doubt thrown at me. One evening, standing in that museum, I heard a mother telling her daughter, "That's the lady who taught us not to whisper." The little girl asked, "Mommy, why was she whispering before?" The mother smiled, "Because the world told her to." I walked away before they saw my tears. Later that week, I visited Miss Ada's diner again. Same lemon pie smell, same gospel radio buzzing in the background. She saw me and grinned. "Look who the Lord brought back," I laughed. "Had to check if the mop's still singin'." She wiped her hands. On her apron. Still harmonizing, baby. We talked for hours. She said, "You ever think about what you gon' leave behind?" I nodded. Every day. She pointed her finger, eyes sharp. "Then make sure it ain't just noise. Make sure it's nourishment." That line stuck with me, so I started a foundation, Louder Legacy, scholarships for young women in media, grants for independent Black creators, therapy funds for survivors finding their voice again. We hosted an annual conference called the Sound Summit, where thousands gathered to share stories. The slogan, "We don't break glass ceilings, we mic them." The first year, I stood on stage, looked at that sea of faces and said, "My name's Helen Harper. Once upon a time, they said I talked too loud. Now y'all call it leadership." The roar that followed? That was heaven speaking fluent applause. After the summit, Devin hugged me backstage. "Ma," he said, "you realize you became what you needed when you were my age?" I nodded. "Yeah, but I didn't do it alone." He smiled. "You never do. You just make it sound that way." We laughed, and for the first time, I let myself imagine something wild. Retirement. Not silence, just rest with rhythm. So I bought a little beach house down in Savannah, ocean on one side, magnolias on the other. Every morning I sit on that porch, coffee steaming, waves clapping like background fans. Sometimes I record voice notes, not for the network, just for me. A collection I call the quiet tapes. And maybe one day when I'm gone, they'll play them somewhere. Not as advice, just as proof that a woman's voice can live forever, even after she stops talking. Because loud was never about volume. It was about value. And I found mine. I used to think retirement meant quiet. But baby, when you've built your whole life out of sound, even silence starts humming with memory. The waves outside my Savannah porch roll in like applause, soft, steady, holy. Every morning they remind me, I earned this peace. But peace don't mean I stopped hearing, because every wind gust still carries a story from somebody who ain't found their mic yet. It started with a letter from a prison in Louisiana, handwritten, folded in half like a prayer. "Dear Miss Helen, my name's Tamara. I'm serving 15 years for something I didn't do, but the women in my cell block listen to your show every Wednesday. When you talk, we feel free for 30 minutes. Thank you for being our voice until we get ours back." I read it 3 times, then stared out at the sea. Even behind bars, these women were finding rhythm. I whispered, "Lord, let them hear themselves through me." That same night, I made a call to Dr. Simone at Echo Rise. "Simone," I said, "what would it take to build studios inside women's prisons?" She paused, then said, "Faith, funding, and permission." I smiled. "Well, baby, I got all 3. 6 months later, Louder Behind Walls was born. Pilot program, 3 prisons, 12 women, 1 mission. Give every inmate a mic and teach her how to tell her story. The first episode came from a woman named Kia. Her voice shook when she said, "They took my freedom, but not my sound." By the time the recording ended, the whole room, guards included, was crying. When we released the series publicly, it hit 2 million streams in a week. People didn't just listen. They donated, wrote letters, volunteered. It was like healing caught frequency. One morning, I got a call from a senator's office. "Miss Harper," the aide said, "your program's changing minds. We want you to testify at a federal hearing on rehabilitation media." I blinked. "You want me to talk to Congress about podcasts?" He laughed. "About freedom?" So I did. The Capitol smelled like cold marble in history. I wore my red blazer, the same one from my first viral speech years ago. As I walked to the microphone, I thought of Kia, of Tamara, of every woman who ever wrote me letters that started with "Dear Miss Helen." I said, "Sound is sacred, and when women speak, prisons shake. What we're doing isn't entertainment. It's evidence that voice is humanity's last unbroken right." Silence fell, a good silence. then applause. The bill passed 6 months later, funding for creative programs in 28 correctional facilities nationwide. And for the first time in my life, I cried not from pain, but from policy. Devin called that night. "Ma, you really out here changing laws with a mic?" I laughed through tears. "Guess I'm still too loud for management." He chuckled. "You realize they gon' make a movie about you one day, right?" I smiled. "Then I hope they hire somebody with a voice like thunder." Around that time, something else started happening. Messages from men, truckers, teachers, dads. They wrote saying louder helped them too. One said, "I never thought a woman's story could make me face my own silence." Another wrote, "Your words made me call my daughter and listen for once." That's when I knew. This movement was never about gender. It was about humanity learning to hear itself again. One evening, I invited Devin and Tasha down to the beach house for dinner. Sunset spilling gold across the porch, waves humming soft beneath our laughter. We ate catfish, cornbread, collard greens, the whole Sunday plate on a Thursday. Tasha leaned back, wine glass in hand. "You ever gonna write a book, Auntie? These stories too rich to stay digital." Devin nodded. "Yeah, Ma, call it something like The Gospel According to Loud." I laughed. "The gospel, huh? Maybe you two should be my editors." But later that night, alone with my thoughts, I wrote the first line anyway. Once upon a silence, there was a woman who refused to whisper. Weeks turned into months. The Louder Legacy Foundation kept growing. New scholarships, new partnerships. We launched a mentorship program for single mothers called Mic to Motherhood. The tagline, "Because leadership sounds a lot like parenting done out loud." Everywhere I looked, the echoes multiplied. Women teaching women, stories birthing stories. And I realized the movement didn't need me at the center anymore. That thought didn't scare me. It freed me. Then came the invitation that brought it all full circle. Howard University, my hometown, my mama's dream school. They wanted to honor me with a doctorate of humane letters. The night of the ceremony, I stood backstage in my cap and gown, palms sweating like a freshman again. Leah squeezed my hand. "You ready, Dr. Harper?" I smiled. "Don't make me cry before the speech." The dean introduced me as a woman whose voice redefined modern storytelling. I stepped to the podium and said, "When they said I talked too loud, they didn't know they were teaching me how to carry a generation's echo." The room stood. Applause thundered, and for the first time I felt something deeper than pride, continuity. After the ceremony, I walked outside under the streetlights. That same D.C. air that once smelled like struggle now tasted like promise. I looked up and whispered, "Mama, we did it." And I swear, for half a second, I heard her laugh in the wind. Back home in Savannah, I recorded a message for the Foundation archives, not for broadcast, just for whoever came after me. "Whoever finds this," I said softly, "remember, power don't come from noise. It comes from knowing when to speak and when to stay still. Both are holy." Then I turned off the mic, sat back, and let the ocean finish the sermon. The next morning, I opened the porch door and saw a package on the step. Inside, no sender, no note, was a tiny bronze plaque. Engraved words, "The woman who taught the world to listen." I laughed, cried, and whispered, "I guess they finally did." They say every story has an ending. But mine, it just changed microphones. 3 years into Savannah life, mornings still start with coffee, waves, and gratitude humming through my bones. I don't chase numbers anymore. Now I count moments. Like when I see a little black girl walking to school with headphones on and her mama's voice saying, "Turn it down." And she answers, "Miss Helen said I don't have to." That's legacy. Not trophies, not contracts, just resonance. One afternoon, I was pruning my magnolia tree when Leah called. "Boss, sorry, Dr. Harper," she teased. "You sitting down?" "I'm in flip-flops and faith. What's up?" She took a breath. You've been nominated for the Pulitzer in audio storytelling." I dropped my pruning shears right into the soil. Pulitzer. Yep, for Louder Behind Walls. They said your work redefined what journalism can sound like. For a long second, I didn't move. Then I whispered, "Mama, they still listening." Awards night glittered like redemption. Red carpet, flashbulbs, that old gold mic pinned to my dress like a brooch. When they called my name, I didn't walk. I floated. At the podium, I said, "This award don't belong to me. It belongs to every woman who ever got called too loud and decided to echo anyway." Standing ovation. But the sound that filled me most wasn't applause. It was the memory of silence finally losing. After that, invitations flooded in again. Harvard lectures, brand deals, more cameras. But something in me had shifted. I'd spent a lifetime proving I could be heard. Now I just wanted to listen. So I started traveling, not to speak, but to hear. I recorded fishermen in Jamaica singing work songs older than the ocean, mothers in Ghana teaching daughters lullabies that survived colonization, teen poets in Chicago turning trauma into slam verses. Everywhere I went, I asked one question: what does freedom sound like to you? And baby, every answer was a sermon. Then came the email that would carry me back to where it all began. The company that once fired me, new CEO, new leadership, new tone, subject line, invitation to keynote our rebirth conference. Leah saw my face when I read it. "Oh, Lord," she said. "What they want now? They want me to bless their comeback." She snorted. Poetic justice on tap. I hesitated for days, then finally thought, maybe some ghosts deserve to hear the living speak. The ballroom looked the same. Polished floors, lemon air freshener, name tags full of pretense. Marcus wasn't there, but his portrait still hung near the stage. I touched my mic, took a breath, and began. 10 years ago, in this very building, someone told me I talked too loud. Today, this same company asked me to teach their leaders how to listen. A hush rippled through the crowd. "I'm not here to gloat," I continued. "I'm here to prove grace makes better headlines than revenge." When I finished, they stood. Executives, interns, janitors, everyone. And for once, the applause didn't feel performative. It felt repentant. Back home that night, I sat on my porch watching lightning bugs dance like tiny spotlights. Devin called. "Ma, you trending again. You broke the internet with that speech." I smiled. Good. Maybe the algorithm finally understands amens. He laughed. "You ever gonna stop inspiring people?" I sipped my tea. When God turns your scars into sound, you don't retire. You just switch stations. A year later, I published my memoir, The Sound of Freedom. It hit #1 in 3 weeks. But the real victory was seeing it on school reading lists beside Baldwin and Angelo. One reviewer wrote, "Helen Harper didn't just raise her voice. She raised the frequency of an entire generation." That line made me close my laptop and whisper, "Amen." The day the Pulitzer arrived by mail, I didn't frame it. I slid it behind Mama's photo on the mantle, because she was the first person who ever taught me volume control, how to turn pain down just enough to make room for hope. Then, out of nowhere, came an invitation that nearly stopped my heart. Smithsonian Hall of Fame induction. They were placing my original kitchen table microphone in the permanent collection. The curator said, "We call it the voice that shifted a culture." When I walked through that exhibit, glass cases glowing, history humming around me, I saw something that made me laugh out loud. Right next to my mic sat a small brass plaque engraved, "Too Loud for Management," approved by history. A month later, I flew back to D.C. to cut the ribbon on the first Louder Legacy Studio for youth. Hundreds of kids gathered, faces bright with possibility. I told them, "This ain't about me. It's about you learning early what it took me 40 years to believe. Your voice was never a mistake." One girl, maybe 10 or 11, raised her hand. "Miss Helen, what if people don't like my voice?" I knelt beside her, smiled. "Then sing louder, baby. they'll adjust. The crowd erupted, because truth, when spoken kindly, always sounds like applause. That night, sitting alone in the quiet studio, I turned on the mic one last time. The red light glowed like a heartbeat. "This is for every listener who found themselves somewhere in my noise," I said. "Thank you for proving that the world don't end when a woman raises her voice. It begins." I paused, breathed deep, and added, "And if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this." Then I smiled, hit stop, and whispered, "The end."